Have you ever heard your name called in the dead of night, only to turn and find no one there? Or felt the weight of unseen eyes watching you from the shadows? These are the kinds of questions that haunt the minds of those who have encountered the legend of the house that whispers your name. This is no ordinary haunted house. It doesn't creak with the groans of restless spirits or rattle with the chains of vengeful ghosts. No, this house is far more insidious. It calls to you. It knows you. And once it has your name, it will never let you go. The story begins in the small, forgotten town of Black Hollow, nestled deep within an ancient forest. The townsfolk speak of the house in hushed tones, warning outsiders to stay away. They say the house has stood for centuries, though no one knows who built it or why. They say it appears only to those it chooses, its location shifting like a mirage in the woods. And they say that once you hear it whisper your name, it's already too late. In this video, we'll delve into the chilling origins of this cursed house, explore the harrowing experiences of those who have crossed its threshold, and uncover the dark truth behind the whispers that echo through its halls. But be warned, this is not a story for the faint of heart. By the end, you may find yourself glancing over your shoulder, wondering if the whispers are real or if they're all in your head. The story of the house that whispers your name is as old as the forest that surrounds it. According to local legend, the house first appeared in Black Hollow over 3 centuries ago, though no records exist of its construction. Some say it was built by a reclusive alchemist who dabbled in forbidden rituals, while others believe it was a gift, or a curse, bestowed by a malevolent entity that dwells deep within the woods. One of the earliest accounts comes from the diary of a traveling merchant named Elias Hargrove, who passed through Black Hollow in 1723. In his writings, Elias describes encountering a strange house while lost in the forest. He claims the house seemed to call to him, its whispers guiding him to its door. Against his better judgment, he entered, and what he found inside still chills those who read his account. Elias wrote of rooms that shifted and changed, hallways that stretched endlessly, and shadows that moved on their own. But the most terrifying detail was the whispers. They weren't just random sounds. They were personal. They spoke of secrets Elias had never shared, of fears he had buried deep within himself. And then, they began to chant his name over and over, until he felt as though his very soul was being pulled from his body. Elias managed to escape, but he was never the same. He spent the rest of his life warning others to avoid the house, though few believed him. Over the years, similar stories emerge. A young woman in the 1800s claimed the house appeared to her after the death of her child, whispering promises of reunion. She vanished without a trace. In the 1920s, a group of hikers reported hearing their names called from deep within the woods. Only one returned, babbling incoherently about the house that knows too much. The common thread in all these tales is the whispers. They are said to be the voice of the house itself, a sentient force that feeds on the fears and regrets of those who enter. Some believe the house is alive, a living entity that grows stronger with each soul it claims. Others think it is a gateway to another realm, a place where the boundaries between the living and the dead blur. Whatever the truth, one thing is certain: the house is not bound by the laws of nature. It appears only to those it deems worthy, or perhaps, those it deems vulnerable. And once it has your name, there is no escape. Clara had always been drawn to the unknown. As a freelance journalist, she made a living uncovering stories that others were too afraid to touch. So when she heard about the legend of the house that whispers your name, she knew she had to investigate. What started as a curiosity quickly became an obsession. She spent weeks researching, piecing together fragments of folklore, newspaper clippings, and first-hand accounts. And now she was here, in Black Hollow, the heart of the mystery. The town was exactly as she had imagined, quiet, isolated, and shrouded in an air of unease. The few locals she encountered avoided her gaze, their faces etched with suspicion. At the gas station, the attendant, a grizzled man named Walter, reluctantly agreed to speak with her. "You're not the first to come looking for that house," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "And you won't be the last. But mark my words, miss, if you value your sanity, you'll turn around and leave now." Clara pressed him for more information, but Walter grew increasingly agitated. "It's not a place for the living," he muttered. "It calls to you, you see. It knows things it shouldn't. And once it has you, there's no going back." Despite his warnings, Clara was undeterred. She checked into a small motel on the edge of town, her room overlooking the dark expanse of the forest. That night, as she reviewed her notes, she heard it, a faint whisper, so soft she almost thought she imagined it. But then it came again, clearer this time. "Clara." Her blood ran cold. The voice was unmistakable. It was her own name, spoken in a tone that was both familiar and alien. She rushed to the window, her heart pounding, but the forest outside was still and silent. The next morning, Clara set out to find the house. Armed with a map and a growing sense of dread, she ventured into the woods. The deeper she went, the more the forest seemed to close in around her. The trees grew thicker, their twisted branches forming a labyrinth of shadows. The air was unnaturally still, and the only sound was the crunch of leaves beneath her feet. Hours passed, and just as Clara began to doubt her sanity, she saw it. A house, looming in the distance. It was exactly as the stories described. A crumbling Victorian structure with windows like empty eye sockets. The whispers returned, louder now, urging her forward. "Clara, come inside." Her rational mind screamed at her to turn back, but something compelled her to keep going. As she approached the house, the whispers grew more insistent, weaving together into a chorus of voices that seemed to come from all around her. She hesitated at the threshold, her hand hovering over the rusted doorknob. The whispers were deafening now, a cacophony of voices that echoed in her skull. And then, as if guided by an unseen force, she turned the knob and stepped inside. The door slammed shut behind her, plunging her into darkness. The moment the door slammed shut, Clara knew she had made a terrible mistake. The house was alive, not in the way a living thing breathes and moves, but in the way a predator waits, patient and calculating. The whispers surrounded her, their voices overlapping in a chaotic symphony. Some were soft and pleading, while others were harsh and demanding. But they all said the same thing. "Clara, we've been waiting for you." She fumbled for her flashlight, its beam cutting through the oppressive darkness. The house was a maze of decaying grandeur, ornate wallpaper peeled away in strips, chandeliers hung precariously from crumbling ceilings, and furniture sat shrouded in dusty sheets. But there was something wrong about it all. The rooms seemed to shift when she wasn't looking, the hallways elongating and twisting in ways that defied logic. As she explored, Clara began to notice strange details. A photograph on the wall showed a family standing in front of the house, but their faces were blurred, as if they had been erased. A grandfather clock in the corner ticked loudly, but the hands never moved. And then there were the whispers, always the whispers. They called her name, but they also spoke of things they couldn't possibly know. "You've always been afraid of the dark, haven't you, Clara?" Do you remember the night your brother disappeared? You never told anyone what really happened. Clara's breath quickened. How could they know these things? She tried to block out the voices, but they only grew louder, more insistent. You can't run from us, Clara. We're a part of you now. Desperate to escape, she ran down a hallway, but it seemed to stretch on forever. The walls closed in around her, the whispers becoming a deafening roar. She stumbled into a room, a nursery. The crib in the corner rocked gently, though there was no breeze. A mobile above it spun, its tinkling melody out of sync with the whispers. And then she saw it. In the corner of the room, a shadow detached itself from the wall, taking on a humanoid form. Its features were indistinct, but its eyes glowed with a malevolent light. It reached out to her, its voice a guttural growl. You belong to us now. Clara screamed and bolted from the room, her flashlight flickering as she ran. The house seemed to conspire against her, its layout shifting to trap her. She found herself in a basement, the air thick with the stench of decay. The walls were covered in strange symbols, their meanings lost to time. In the center of the room stood an altar, its surface stained with what looked like dried blood. The whispers reached a fever pitch, their voices merging into a single deafening command. Stay. Clara's flashlight died, plunging her into darkness. She felt hands, cold, skeletal hands, grasping at her from all sides. She fought blindly, her screams echoing through the house. And then, silence. When Clara awoke, she was no longer in the basement. She found herself in a dimly lit parlor, the air heavy with the scent of old wood and decay. The whispers were gone, but the silence was worse. It felt like the house was holding its breath, waiting for something. She tried to stand, but her body felt heavy, as if weighed down by an invisible force. The room was familiar, though she couldn't place why. The furniture, the wallpaper, even the faint ticking of a clock. It all felt like a distorted memory. And then she saw them. Shadows began to emerge from the corners of the room, taking on human shapes. They were faint at first, like figures seen through frosted glass, but they grew more solid with each passing moment. Clara recognized them, faces from her past. Her brother, who had disappeared when they were children. Her grandmother, who had passed away years ago. Even people she had only met briefly, their features twisted into expressions of sorrow and anger. Why did you leave us, Clara? Her brother's shadow asked, its voice hollow and accusing. You could have saved us, her grandmother's shadow added, its tone dripping with disappointment. Clara tried to speak, but no words came out. The shadows closed in around her, their cold hands brushing against her skin. She felt a wave of guilt and despair, emotions that weren't entirely her own. It was as if the house was feeding on her regrets, using them to break her down. And then, the figure from the basement appeared. It stood at the edge of the room, its form shifting and writhing like smoke. Its eyes burned with a cold, malevolent light, and its voice was a guttural growl that seemed to come from everywhere at once. You cannot escape, it said. The house has chosen you. Your fears, your regrets, your secrets, they belong to us now. Clara's mind raced. She knew she had to fight back, but how? The house had stripped her of her strength, her will, even her sense of self. But then she remembered something, a detail from her research. In one of the accounts she had read, a survivor claimed that the house could be weakened by confronting its illusions, by refusing to give in to fear. Summoning the last of her courage, Clara stood and faced the figure. You're not real, she said, her voice trembling but defiant. You're just a reflection of my fears, and I won't let you control me anymore. The figure hesitated, its form flickering like a dying flame. The shadows around her began to dissolve, their whispers fading into silence. The room itself seemed to shudder, the walls cracking and splintering as if the house was in pain. Clara didn't wait to see what would happen next. She turned and ran, her legs carrying her through the twisting hallways and out the front door. She didn't stop until she was deep in the forest, the house no longer visible behind her. When she finally emerged from the woods, the sun was rising over Black Hollow. The townsfolk watched her with wary eyes, but no one approached her. She didn't stay to explain. She got in her car and drove, leaving the town and the house far behind. But the whispers didn't stop. Even now, miles away from Black Hollow, Clara hears them. Soft, insistent, always just out of reach. They call her name in the dead of night, reminding her that the house is still waiting. And one day, it will call her back. Clara's story is one of many, a chilling reminder of the power of fear and the dangers of delving too deep into the unknown. The house still stands, hidden somewhere in the forests of Black Hollow, waiting for its next victim. It is a place that defies explanation, a living entity that feeds on the fears and regrets of those who enter. But what makes the house that whispers your name so terrifying is not just its supernatural nature. It's the way it preys on the human mind. It knows your secrets, your weaknesses, your darkest thoughts. It uses them against you, twisting your reality until you can no longer tell what's real and what's not. And once it has you, there's no escape. Clara survived, but at what cost? The whispers follow her wherever she goes, a constant reminder of the house's grip on her soul. She has tried to move on, to forget, but the house won't let her. It calls to her in her dreams, its voice a siren song that she can't ignore. And she's not alone. Others have heard the whispers too. Some have vanished without a trace, while others, like Clara, carry the house's curse with them, forever haunted by its presence. So, the next time you hear your name whispered in the dark, be careful. It might just be the wind, or it might be something far more sinister. The house is always listening, always waiting, and once it has your name, there's no turning back.